On June 18, 2023, a submersible vehicle known as the Titan would be launched from the Polar Prince at approximately 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The 5 passengers on board, including OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush, would be visiting the wreckage of the Titanic, a tour that cost around $250,000 per person and was run by Rush's company. However, after only about 1 hour and 45 minutes into their 8-hour expedition, the Polar Prince would lose communications with the submersible vehicle, and after it failed to resurface that evening, the United States Coast Guard, the Canadian Coast Guard, and other international entities would start the desperate search for the sub, which was reported to only have around 96 hours of oxygen stored. But if we want a full timeline, we need to go all the way back, all the way to April 10th, 1912, when the Titanic set off on its maiden voyage from Southampton, England, heading all the way to New York in the United States. Due to its design, the Titanic had been nicknamed the Unsinkable Ship, but on April 14th, after repeatedly ignoring warnings, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic would scrape alongside an iceberg, and water would soon begin to fill the mailroom, as well as about 4 other compartments. Thomas Andrews, the designer of the Titanic, was on board, and after inspecting the damage, predicted that they only had roughly 2 hours before the ship would sink. Famously, the ship did not have enough lifeboats for its 2,240 passengers, due to the fact they thought it looked ugly along the side. By 2:18 a.m., the ship's bow was already in the process of sinking, and as a result, the stern would be lifted up briefly before it began to break off the ship. By 2:20 a.m., the Titanic was gone. There would only be about 705 survivors, meaning roughly 1,535 passengers and crew lost their lives. The Titanic would be lost for over 70 years before Robert Ballard would rediscover it on September 1st, 1985 with a remote-operated submersible vehicle of his own design. In 1995, before he had even written the script, James Cameron, the director of the film Titanic, visited the shipwreck to film it for the movie. This film would be released in 1997 and would not only be the highest-grossing film ever at the time, but also the most expensive film ever made at the time, ultimately reigniting interest in the Titanic. OceanGate, the company behind the Titanic sub-disaster, was founded in 2009, and although they began renting their submersible vehicles to researchers, by 2011 they had begun transporting what they described as citizen scientists on tourist excursions. In 2013, the company began to design its own submersible ships, building one known as the Cyclops, which would be unveiled in 2015. In December 2016, they would begin the construction of Cyclops 2, later renamed Titan, in March of 2018. As far as I'm aware, the Titan had never been inspected or certified by any agency, with OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush allegedly saying things like, "It got in the way of innovation." In 2021, OceanGate would conduct its first dive to the Titanic wreckage with the Titan. It would be a success. On June 16, 2023, the Titan, on board a ship named the Polar Prince, would leave Newfoundland in Canada at 8:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Over the next 2 days, they would travel 400 miles to the wreckage of the Titanic. 8 a.m. June 18th, the 22-foot-long submersible built by OceanGate was launched into the water. According to OceanGate, the ship was capable of going as deep as 13,000 feet, which would be an extra 500 feet past where the Titanic sat, and only contained a single porthole. On board for the 8-hour excursion would be the CEO of OceanGate, again Stockton Rush, a French Titanic expert, a British businessman and his 19-year-old son, and a British businessman and pilot. It is estimated that the submersible would take roughly 2 hours to get down, spend about 4 hours among the wreckage, and take another 2 hours to resurface. But as previously mentioned, at 9:45 a.m., communication was lost. Shortly after, the Coast Guard would detect the sound they say is comparable to that of an implosion, but this would not be announced until much later. By 5:40 p.m., the United States Coast Guard would receive the first alert from the Polar Prince after the sub was supposed to surface around 2 hours and 40 minutes earlier, at 3 p.m. At 9:13 p.m., the Canadian Coast Guard was also alerted. On Monday, June 19th, the surface search began, with planes flying over the water, looking and hoping for a surfaced sub on top. This was due to the fact that they did not have the capability to search the water. The following day, June 20th, a ship known as the Deep Energy would arrive, and at around 7 a.m. begin to deploy remote-operated vehicles to help search the water. That same day, at 1 p.m., the Coast Guard would hold a press conference in which they alerted the public to the fact that the Titan sub had only roughly 96 hours of oxygen stored when it launched, meaning at the time, it had only about 40 hours of air left. June 21st, 12:18 p.m., the United States Coast Guard tweeted that an aircraft had detected what was described as underwater noises they referred to as banging, but at the time it was still being determined if this was the Titan sub, another man-made noise, or something else entirely. On June 22nd, 8 a.m., it was determined that the sub, should it still be submerged, would now be out of oxygen, meaning unless it had somehow made it to the surface, all 5 passengers would almost certainly be dead. At 11:45 a.m., debris believed to be from the Titan would be found roughly 1,600 feet away from the Titanic by one of those remote vehicles launched by Deep Energy. About 3 hours later, at 3 p.m., OceanGate would release a statement saying they believed everyone on board the Titan was likely dead. The Coast Guard would say that the pressure chamber of the sub likely lost pressure and as a result, imploded. Possibly at the time the Polar Prince first lost communication with the sub. This is when they would reveal that they had heard a noise shortly after communication was lost, which they believed to be consistent with an implosion. However, it seems that they had waited until they had definitive proof before revealing that info. On Wednesday, June 28th, large pieces of the Titan sub began to be recovered from where the debris were found, again only roughly 1,600 feet away from the Titanic. Once the debris surfaced, it was also determined that there were potential human remains within them as well. Jasper Graham Jones, an associate professor in mechanical and marine engineering at Plymouth University, spoke to Insider in an article released only about 4 hours before I recorded this, in which they said that it was likely a failure due to the use of carbon fiber on the hull. Graham Jones would go on to say most submersibles use titanium in such places, but based on the images of debris, it is likely that both the hull and the porthole failed. During the search, videos and photos would also surface, leading some to believe the submarine was very cheaply built, with some off-the-shelf parts being used, which Stockton Rush seemed to brag about. The fact the sub was piloted by a game controller would also become a meme, but apparently this is actually industry standard. And that's all we know so far. It is common knowledge that the passengers had signed waivers that include warnings of potential death, but it is unknown if OceanGate can still be held liable, as that will all depend on if it could be proven that they were grossly negligent. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing, as I cover many true crime and strange stories on this channel. And check this video out where I talk about 5 other underwater mysteries. I'll see you next time.